Good afternoon. My name is Karen Engle, and I teach here at the University of Texas School of Law. And I'm also co-director of the Bernard and Audre Rapoport Center for Human Rights and Justice. And on behalf of the Rapoport Center, it's my great honor to welcome you this afternoon to the symposium, Puerto Rico in the Wake of Crisis Toward a Just Afterlife of Disaster. And we're very happy to be co-hosting that with the John Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, and happy to have the support of a bunch of other folks I'll tell you about in a moment. This event is the brainchild of Mónica Jiménez, and it is in some ways a follow-up to an event she and some colleagues across campus organized last year in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And the hope was to bring together for this meeting scholars, activists, and artists from the island and the diaspora to reflect, along with some of those faculty who participated, as well as many others of us, to reflect over a year later on the ways in which Maria and its aftermath have influenced the scholarship, art, and advocacy of Puerto Ricans on the island and in the diaspora. And a brief look at the program demonstrates that we have a powerful cohort of people here to explore these issues. And I want to begin just by thanking all of those of you who have traveled to be with us here today and tomorrow and participate. So it cannot go wrong now that you're here. So I have a confession to make, which is that I've not been at UT this semester. So I'm reaping the benefits of the enormous efforts of many others, especially Mónica. So it was not only her brainchild, but she has designed nearly every aspect of this event from start to finish. And she's had support, of course, in making that design come to life, both logistical and financial support. So I'll start with the financial support and say, in addition to the Warfield Center and the Rapoport Center, there's an impressive array of co-sponsors of this event, and Mónica went and got folks on board, and I mean, they're in your program, but I'm just going to read them off because it's really incredible, and we're very proud to be working with them on the event. So the Department of Mexican American and Latina Studies, Leolas Benson Latin American Studies and Collections, the Center for Mexican American Studies, the Dean's Office of the College of Liberal Arts, African and African Diaspora Studies Department, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, the Department of History, the Department of English, the Center for Women's and Gender Studies, and Planet Texas 2050. And Mónica is a professor in the African and African Diasporic Studies Department. I'll say more about her when I get to introduce her later, but it's just to say she actually was teaching this semester and doing other things as well. So actually, I think we should now give you an applause. So Mónica wants to personally thank the people she's worked with to make this happen. So I'm not going to do that now, but when she does, please hear me echoing and thumbs up and all of that, echoing the gratitude that she expresses. So I'll just finish by saying a word about the Rapoport Center and why it's important for us to host this event. So the symposium's attention to scholarship, art, and activism, and the overlap among those three fits very much with our motto, which is to be partners for change at the intersection of academics and advocacy. And although we're housed here at the law school and, have these uncomfortable seats, tomorrow they'll be more comfortable, but the state of Texas behind us. Although we're housed here, we're very much, and have been from the beginning, an interdisciplinary center. We have over 100 faculty affiliates from across campus, many of whom are participating here today. And the motto reflects our unique position as a center, I think, or at least as one of the centers that not only works across disciplines, regions, and issue areas, but that brings academics quite self-consciously into conversation with advocates, policymakers, and activists. And doing so is central to our mission, which is to serve as a focal point for critical interdisciplinary analysis and practice of human rights and social justice. And it also, this event also fits with a multi-year project we have focused on structural, in particular the legal structural drivers of inequality. And as we'll hear much about, I'm sure, in the next 24 or so hours, Hurricane Maria has thrown into sharp relief the colonial and racial underpinnings of the many public and private legal forms that structure Puerto Rico's experience and inability to respond to what gets labeled as crisis. So it's sort of like a new crisis that folks can't respond to, but part of that is it's just bringing it into relief once again. And I mean, I say Puerto Rico for good and bad, as you all know, and all of those who are participating here, for good and bad has a lot to teach scholars, activists, and advocates, and artists. And I'm really, it's great to see you all self-consciously taking that on in your work, and I look forward to learning a great deal from you. I'll now introduce Minkah, who's associate professor also in African and African diasporic studies, and he is the director of the Warfield Center. And this is, since you've been director, right, this is our first chance to do something together. So please join me in welcoming Minkah Makalani.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Got to bring a different energy into a courtroom than the one it normally wants. So I'm going to be very brief, but on behalf of the Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, I want to welcome those of you who are coming to Austin, to the University of Texas, and all of you to this important symposium. And contemplating the tasks that you are undertaking here to think through Puerto Rico in the wake of crisis, a disaster birthed in the heart of U.S. empire, I'm reminded of two Caribbean thinkers, C.L.R. James from Trinidad and Edouard Glissant from Martinique. In his now famous essay, From Toussaint Louverture to Fidel Castro, C.L.R. James notes of the Haitian and Cuban revolutions, quote, "The people who made them, the problems, and the attempts to solve them are peculiarly West Indian, the product of a peculiar origin and a peculiar history. West Indians first became aware of themselves as a people in the Haitian Revolution. Whatever its ultimate fate, the Cuban Revolution marks the ultimate stage of a Caribbean quest for national identity. In a scattered series of disparate islands, the process consists of a series of uncoordinated periods of drift, punctuated by spurts, leaps, and catastrophes." Approaching the same problem, but from a slightly different angle, Edouard Glissant, in his Poetics of Relation, implores us to think through how, quote, "the ruins of the plantation have affected American cultures all around." In one of his more moving passages, first time reading from my iPad, so haven't gotten the sleep button just right. In one of his more moving passages, he says this: "It is understandable that in this universe, every cry was an event. Night in the cabins gave birth to this other enormous silence from which music finally burst out into this long shout, a music of reserved spirituality through which the body suddenly expresses itself. Monotonous chants, syncopated, broken by prohibitions, set free by the entire thrust of bodies, produce their language from one end of this world to the other. Negro spirituals and blues persisting in towns and growing cities. Jazz, beguines, and calypsos bursting into barrios and shanty towns. Salsas and reggaes assembled everything blunt and direct, painfully stifled, and patiently differed into this varied speech. This was the cry of the plantation, transfigured into the speech of the world." Since the 1970s, the Warfield Center has had as a guiding intellectual concern the ideas, needs, cultures, and struggles of Black people on the UT campus and in Austin, as well as in Latin America, Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean. To concern ourselves with the African diaspora, I would offer, is to concern ourselves with life itself, which is to say the needs, cultures, and political struggles of U.S., Latin American, African, Asian, European, and Caribbean societies and peoples. In the Warfield Center's Diaspora Talk series, which brings to Austin intellectuals from around the world, in our Performing Blackness series, where we have renowned artists join us and discuss their art and poetics, in our Warfield Center Symposium, which just yesterday brought together a group of scholars to engage the life works of W.E.B. Du Bois and this, the 150th year anniversary of his birth. In our upcoming Black Studies Conference in March, which will focus on 50 years of Black Studies at UT. And in the faculty that we have brought to campus over the years, our concern has always been not merely diversity, but to transform how we think and teach and write about the world, which is to say, to transform thought itself so that we might be able to grapple with the most important problems and political challenges of our time. It was therefore with little hesitation that when Mónica sent me an email asking to co-sponsor this event, once I realized that we did have the money to do so, I eagerly agreed. Indeed, Hurricane Maria deeply impacted Black Studies students, faculty, and our families. But possibly equally important, we are convinced that how the challenges born of this catastrophe in Puerto Rico, how you gathered here today and tomorrow grapple with this disaster, will inform how anyone, or at least anyone who is serious, should think about the Caribbean, the Black world, and life itself. So I want to say thank you for the immensely important work you are doing here today and tomorrow.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, thank you. I am so pleased to see you all here and to welcome you to UT Law and to tomorrow to the Gordon White Building, the home of Mexican American Latino Studies and African Diaspora Studies at UT. So I am completely heartened to see the great response of people like you in this audience and our participants for this event and an interest in things and issues and questions concerning Puerto Rico. So to give you a tiny bit about me, I am Mónica Jiménez. I am an assistant professor of African and African Diaspora Studies here, and I'm a historian of Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm also an alumnus or alumna of this very institution in which we are sitting, the UT School of Law. And it is here that I first sort of embarked upon my academic pursuit of questions related to the legal relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. So while a graduate student here, I first encountered the notorious insular cases, which many of you in this room have studied, read about, and I think we'll hear more about over the course of the weekend. But they are the very first legal cases, Supreme Court cases, that have to do with Puerto Rico and the U.S. and an attempt to define what the relationship between the island and the U.S. will be. It is there in those early 20th century cases that the idea and the term unincorporated territory were born, a status that continues to be the status of Puerto Rico today, and which has produced inequalities and limitations that continue to define the island today. So those old, dusty cases, which spoke very explicitly of mongrel races and the need to teach islanders proper democratic principles, seemed so quaintly racist to me and anachronistic at the time that I discovered them, that I couldn't quite wrap my mind around the fact that they continue to be the basis for the U.S.'s relationship with Puerto Rico and the basis for the island's colonial status and its exclusion. That status, unincorporated territory, has meant that the island has sat outside of the U.S. proper and has remained at the whims of the U.S. Congress for 120 years. Over the next 2 days, you will hear how that designation has created unique difficulties for the island, and in particular, in the past few years, and most visibly in the midst of the island's debt crisis, and now in the wake of Hurricane Maria. Last fall, we all watched as hurricane after hurricane assaulted the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. First, we witnessed as Hurricane Harvey flooded Houston, releasing toxic sludge and devastating a city with which many of us in Austin have intimate ties. Houston is where I grew up. It's the city that my family migrated to when they left Puerto Rico, and where my family still lives. A few weeks later, we watched as Hurricane Irma laid a trail of destruction through the Caribbean, just nicking Puerto Rico on its way to Florida, where it became the costliest hurricane in that state's history. I, like many other Puerto Ricans, have a large extended family that make their home in Florida, and I watched Irma's path anxiously. Then, just as we were wrapping our heads around the impacts of these two massive storms, Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017. We talked about this. I really wanted this not, I wanted to not get emotional, but I may. And you, I think, will all understand. When the island went nearly silent at the height of the storm, we held our breaths and we hoped that our people and our communities would be safe. Many of us waited days, weeks even, to find out if our families had survived the storm and how. Then the images began to show the storm's destruction and the devastated condition that islanders were left living in. As image after image appeared and the full extent of how this hurricane had transformed the island became clear, I, like many other Puerto Ricans living in the diaspora, began to ask myself, what can I do? I reached out to friends and colleagues, some of which are sitting in this room, and together we tried to process what was happening at home, what we were witnessing. We, individually and collectively, did what little we could to help our communities from afar. We hosted relatives who had been displaced, we organized relief drives, we sent money, and we shared our outrage and our grief to those who would listen. The island, which to most people was invisible before Hurricane Maria, became hyper-visible in its aftermath. For those of us who study and work on issues concerning Puerto Rico, this visibility is both a boon and a burden. While we welcome the attention to the deep-seated problems that U.S. colonialism has wrought on the island, the repeated conversations about the dire circumstances of life on the island, the insurmountable debt, the environmental devastation, and the fraught recovery has made our scholarship into a sort of grief work that is both increasingly painful and yet deeply, deeply necessary. Hurricane Maria changed me as it has changed all of us who witnessed its fury and its devastation. It also has changed my relationship to my research. The storm redirected the questions I had been asking myself about the island's legal history, its particular form of coloniality, and its place within the Caribbean and the world. It gave those questions greater urgency and significance and raised many, many more. Most especially, it forced me to ask myself what impact I sought from my own work. How can I make my research useful and relevant to Puerto Rico's future? These concerns are what motivated me to convene this symposium. I knew that others were also feeling the same urgency and weight about our work and what roles we would play in Puerto Rico's recovery. Excuse me. I wanted to have a dialogue across disciplines and with others who work in Puerto Rico to talk about how we each saw our work and our roles reoriented by the passage of Maria. I knew the conversation had to address the most pressing issues the island faces: environmental degradation, mortality, debt, and the ways these problems are complicated by colonialism. But also, I knew that we had to discuss the ways that Puerto Ricans are finding hope and joy in the storm's aftermath, by organizing in community, by creating art and beauty in the post-Maria landscape. In preparing for this event, I've asked each of our participants to consider what this past year has meant for them, their work, and the communities that they are involved with on the island. A seemingly straightforward question that will undoubtedly give us much to discuss over the next 2 days. Before I introduce our panel, I would like to take a few minutes to thank many, many people and institutions that have come together to make this possible. I won't list all of the institutions because Karen has done that, but I will say that it was certainly a bit of academic crowdsourcing that made this possible, and for that I'm grateful, because everybody that I approached said yes. Nobody said, no, I can't help you, whether it was funding or logistics. Everybody gave generously of their time and of their funds, and for that I'm extremely grateful. So last fall, Karen approached me about helping to organize a lecture with Elizabeth Yampier, a prominent Puerto Rican environmental justice activist who you all will hear from in just a little while. I was excited that Elizabeth's visit could help keep our attentions on Puerto Rico, and I floated the idea of organizing the symposium around her visit. And Karen enthusiastically gave me the green light to proceed with the help of the Rapoport Center, despite the fact that I had no budget and no idea how to organize a conference. But what I did have was a deep commitment to Puerto Rico and a passion about ensuring that the island and its residents are not forgotten in the whirl and the next disaster or political scandal. And so it turns out the commitment and passion were enough because here we all are. And Karen's enthusiasm was just the beginning of the enthusiastic support I have received in bringing this vision to life. And as I said, everyone I approached said yes immediately without hesitation. So I'd like to thank Karen and Dan Brinks, who are the co-directors of the Rapoport Center, for creating the space for this event, for hosting it. I'd like to also thank the Rapoport Center staff, Kate Taylor, Ariel Travis, who joined our endeavor midstream but jumped right in. And in particular, I have to give the most giant of thanks to Sarah Eliason, who is sitting right over there, and who all of our participants have been in communication with. But without Sarah, we would not be sitting here today. She literally made everything happen and essentially taught me how to put a conference together. So thank you, Sarah, for everything that you have done. I'd also like to thank Minkah Makalani and the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies, who very generously and eagerly volunteered financial support, as well as staff support. Stephanie Lang and Justice Madden of the Warfield Center have been helping me organize the event tomorrow at the Gordon White Building and make that possible. So I want to thank also our participants, moderators, chairs, everyone sitting up here, some of whom I've only met today, but when I reached out, said, yes, I will be there, absolutely. This is important, and I want to participate. So I'm grateful to you all for also eagerly joining this event and offering your wisdom, your thoughts, and your knowledge to all of us in this room. And then I have to thank my family, my partner, Roger Reeves, who's sitting back there, and our daughter, Naima, who over this last year have been instrumental in helping me process what it is to watch your home be destroyed in a way that it was, and both personally and professionally, right? So there's the professional weight of having to sort of come back to the topics of Puerto Rico again and again, and revisiting that, but then also knowing what the toll it's taken on your personal life, your family, your friends, your communities. So without my partner and my daughter, that would have been much more difficult, and organizing this would have been even much more difficult. So thank you to everyone, and I hope that you all will stay with us today and tomorrow, and that you will enjoy the event, you will interact with our presenters, and that together we can have a really useful discussion about what Puerto Rico is today and what it can become. So with that, I want to turn it over to my dear friend and colleague, Nicole Burrows, who's sitting over here, who will introduce our panel and act as moderator for our first panel. Dr. Burrows is an assistant professor of African and African Diaspora Studies with affiliations in the Department of History, the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, and the John L. Warfield Center for African and African American Studies. Her book manuscript, Seeds of Solidarity, African-Indian Relations and the 1935 Labor Rebellions in British Guyana, explores the historical possibility of a movement forged from the edges of empire in the midst of economic and environmental crisis, very relevant to our discussions. Her research seeks to answer questions about the practice of solidarity, the legacies of dispossession, enslavement, indenture, the politics of diaspora, and how power, identity, and material struggle are shaped over time. Burrows has a presidential postdoctoral fellow in the history department at Brown University and was awarded predoctoral fellowships from the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies at the University of Virginia and the African and African Diaspora Studies Department here at the University of Texas. She holds a PhD in history from the CUNY Graduate Center in the fields of Latin American and Caribbean history and African Diaspora Studies. Dr. Burrows, thank you.